Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to watch and stay loyal to this channel. Love you all. Without further ado, let's get straight into the story. On a night in 1962, a man named Tony Vallelonga was working at one of the biggest nightclubs in New York City. Tony worked as a waiter and security guard. While on duty, Tony noticed a notorious gangster entering the club. The gangster handed over his prized hat at the coat check, as the club had a strict rule against wearing hats inside. The gangster, however, was extremely attached to his hat and even threatened to burn the club down if anything happened to it. From a distance, Tony overheard the threat and came up with a mischievous plan. Later that evening, when the gangster came to retrieve his hat, the coat check staff claimed it had gone missing. Furious, the gangster repeated his threat, saying he would burn the club down if his hat wasn't found by the next day. Hearing this, the club owner decided to temporarily close the venue to avoid trouble until the situation was resolved. Realizing that his actions had caused his workplace to shut down, Tony felt guilty. He went to meet the gangster at a bar to return the hat. He lied, claiming he had snatched it from a thief, but that the thief had managed to escape. Impressed by Tony's story and seeing him as a hero, the gangster forgave the club owner and even gave Tony some money as a token of gratitude. The next morning, Tony returned home, changed clothes, and went to bed. He lived with his wife, Dolores, and their 2 children. Later in the afternoon, when Tony woke up, he saw Dolores serving drinks to 2 black plumbers who were fixing a leaky faucet in their house. After the plumbers left, Tony, filled with disgust, threw away the glasses they had used. At that time in 1962, racism in America was rampant. There were no laws promoting equality, and many white people believed black individuals were inferior. Tony shared this mindset and couldn't stand the idea of drinking from a glass used by black people. Meanwhile, the nightclub where Tony worked remained closed, as the owner was still shaken by the gangster's threats. This left Tony officially unemployed. One afternoon, Tony received a phone call from an acquaintance who offered him a job as a personal driver for a famous pianist named Shirley, often referred to as Document. Intrigued by the offer, Tony asked for Doc's address and went to meet him. To Tony's surprise, Doc was black. Not only that, but Doc's clothing and demeanor were unconventional. He wore a bright yellow outfit, accessorized with a gold necklace, and sat on a throne-like chair, exuding an air of regality. Doc explained that he was planning an 8-week tour across America and needed a driver who could also manage his schedule, wash, and iron his clothes. He offered Tony $100 per week for the job. Initially, Tony refused, unwilling to work for a black man. Tony was a man of principle, deeply rooted in his beliefs. However, when Doc raised the offer to $125 per week, Tony quickly accepted. The day of the tour arrived. Doc's management handed Tony the car keys along with a book called The Green Book. This guide contained travel routes, recommended restaurants, and a list of accommodations that allowed black guests. With everything in place, Tony began his role as Doc's driver. During the journey, Tony grew annoyed by Doc's constant rules: no eating while driving, no smoking, and no talking. Tony, who already disliked black people, found his resentment growing even stronger. That evening, they arrived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for the first concert of the tour. Doc, accompanied by 2 fellow musicians, performed in front of an all-white audience. Watching Doc's incredible piano skills, Tony was awestruck. He couldn't believe that someone he considered low-class could play so brilliantly. During subsequent stops, Tony made it a point to inspect the pianos Doc was supposed to use. On one occasion, he found the piano dirty and demanded a staff member replace it. When the staff refused, saying the dirty piano was good enough for someone like Doc, Tony became furious and punched the man. After the performance, they moved on to the next city. As usual, Tony was amazed by Doc's talent. Amid his admiration, he began to wonder why Doc continued to perform for white audiences who constantly belittled him. At the next tour stop, the white audience greeted Doc warmly. After playing one song, Doc asked for a break. When he tried to use the bathroom, the organizers refused to let him use the main restroom and directed him to a separate facility designated for Black people. Feeling humiliated, Doc asked Tony to take him back to their hotel so he could use the bathroom in private. When they returned to the event, Tony was puzzled by how Doc managed to smile and greet the white audience without showing any signs of hurt. One of Doc's fellow musicians later explained that this wasn't the first time Doc had been treated this way. He was used to it, so much so that he had become skilled at enduring such insults. The following day, Doc advised Tony to prepare himself for worse acts of racism, warning that the discrimination they had already faced was just the beginning. One morning, Tony decided to write a letter to his wife, Dolores. When Doc read the letter, he commented that Tony's handwriting and phrasing were terrible. Doc then offered to rewrite the letter, crafting it with poetic and romantic words. This moment marked the beginning of their growing friendship. When Dolores received the letter, she was deeply touched by its sentiment. The next day, Tony and Doc arrived at a hotel in Memphis. As they were about to enter, Tony ran into two of his old friends. Seeing Tony working for a Black man, his friends were confused and assumed he must be desperate for money. One of them even offered Tony a job, but Tony politely declined. Later that night, Tony received a call from the same friend, inviting him to meet at a bar. When Tony stepped out of his room, he found Doc standing outside as well. Doc suspected that Tony was planning to accept his friend's job offer. To prevent this, Doc doubled Tony's salary on the spot, asking him to stay on as his assistant. Tony tried to calm Doc, reassuring him that he had no intention of taking any other job during the tour. He promised that he would remain loyal to Doc until the tour was over, regardless of any higher offers. Tony explained that he only wanted to meet his friends for a casual drink. Hearing this, Doc was relieved. After returning from the bar, Tony joined Doc in the hotel lobby, where they began to chat. Doc shared the story of how he became a renowned pianist. He explained that years ago, while playing piano in a bar, a white pianist admired his performance. This pianist offered Doc a job at a recording company, playing classical music, the music traditionally associated with white culture. From that moment, Doc's career as a classical pianist took off. Tony then encouraged Doc to play music that truly reflected his own desires, suggesting jazz as an option. Tony explained that what the audience truly loved about Doc's performances wasn't the classical music itself, but the way Doc played it. To Tony, Doc's piano skills were absolutely captivating. Doc appreciated Tony's encouragement, but explained that he was under contract to perform classical music. After the performance in Memphis, the two continued their tour, heading to the next city. During the journey, their car was stopped by two policemen. One officer ordered Tony to step out of the car and began interrogating him. They assumed Doc was a fugitive simply because he was Black and suspected Tony of being his accomplice. Tony became enraged and punched one of the officers. Both he and Doc were arrested. At the police station, Doc questioned why he was being detained when he had done nothing wrong. However, none of the officers bothered to answer his questions. Frustrated, Doc threatened to file a lawsuit against the police department unless he was allowed to call his lawyer. Intimidated by the threat, the officers eventually allowed Doc to make a phone call. A short while later, the police chief received a phone call. He looked visibly shaken, repeatedly apologizing over the line and promising to release Doc immediately. Curious about who Doc had called, Tony asked him after they were freed. Doc revealed that, because of Tony's actions, he had been forced to contact the brother of the current U.S. President, Robert Kennedy, who was serving as the Attorney General, to secure their release. Rather than apologizing, Tony laughed at the story. At first, the conversation was lighthearted, but things took a turn when Tony joked about how Doc lived a life of luxury, surrounded by wealth, residing in a grand home, and enjoying a perfect life. Doc suddenly grew angry. He stepped out of the car, leaving Tony baffled. Tony quickly followed him, and Doc, now furious, confronted him. "You have no idea what my life is like," Doc shouted. "Yes, I live in a big house, and yes, I have money. But I've always been alone. I'm trapped by the same white people who pay me to entertain them. They respect me on stage, but once the performance is over, they treat me no differently than any other black person they look down on. Doc's voice trembled as he continued. I am lonely, Tony. White people don't want to be my friends, and black people avoid me because they think I act too much like a white man. I've been alone my entire life, no friends, no family, no one to turn to. Hearing Doc's heartfelt confession, Tony was left speechless. Up until then, Tony had envied Document. He couldn't understand how a lowly black man like Doc could earn so much money by simply playing the piano while he had to work tirelessly to support his family. But after hearing Doc's story, Tony realized the truth. No matter how successful or wealthy a black person might be, their life was far more challenging than his own. After pouring out his emotions, Doc returned to the car, and the two of them continued their journey. The next day, they arrived at the final destination of the tour, a prestigious restaurant in Birmingham. Once again, Doc faced blatant racism. The restaurant manager provided him with a waiting area in a storage room near the kitchen, while his two accompanying musicians were given a luxurious private lounge. Witnessing this unfair treatment, Tony could only take a deep breath to calm his frustration. Inside the restaurant, while Tony was having dinner, the two musicians joined him at his table. One of them explained that Doc didn't need this tour to make money, he was already wealthy. The real reason Doc embarked on this journey was to open people's hearts, to show that black people deserve recognition and equality. A short while later, Doc entered the restaurant to join them. However, he was quickly thrown out. The waiter explained that black people were not allowed to dine there. Tony tried negotiating with the restaurant manager, asking them to make an exception just for tonight, but the manager refused. Instead, he offered to set up a table for Doc in the backyard. Doc rejected the offer outright and threatened to cancel his performance at the restaurant if he wasn't allowed to eat inside with the other guests. Alarmed by Doc's threat, the manager pulled Tony aside for a private conversation. He attempted to bribe Tony into convincing Doc to dine outside, stating that letting a black man eat inside the restaurant was equivalent to allowing a monkey to eat off a golden plate. Just as Tony was about to punch the manager, Doc stopped him and told him to hold back. Doc then said he was willing to follow Tony's advice. If Tony wanted him to perform, he would eat outside. But if Tony agreed with him, they could walk away and cancel the final performance. Hearing this, Tony was deeply moved. He finally understood the extent of the hardships Doc endured. After careful thought, Tony made his decision. He walked away with Doc, canceling the final show. As they left, Doc suggested stopping at a small bar catering to black patrons for dinner. After they finished their meal, a waiter asked why they were dressed so formally just to eat at a simple bar. Tony explained that Doc was a famous pianist who was supposed to perform at an upscale restaurant that night, but they chose to eat here instead because the food was better. Hearing Tony's praise, the waiter was flattered and asked Doc to play the piano to entertain the guests as payment for the meal. Doc agreed, and as he played, the entire bar lit up with joy. The band members in the bar even joined him for an impromptu jam session. For the first time in his life, Doc felt what it was like to have fun without having to fake a smile. After the lively evening, Doc and Tony headed home. It was Christmas Eve, and they had both grown and changed in profound ways during their journey, gaining new perspectives on life. As they drove, a snowstorm began to worsen. Tony suggested stopping at the nearest inn, but Doc insisted they push through. He told Tony it was important for him to make it home that night to celebrate Christmas with his family. Doc took over the wheel and drove through the storm. After a long and grueling journey, they finally arrived at Tony's house. Tony invited Doc inside to join his family, but Doc declined. Aware of the racial prejudices of the time, he knew his presence as a black man might make Tony's family uncomfortable. Doc chose to leave and return to his own home, resuming his solitary life without family or friends. However, as Doc sat alone in his grand, empty house, he remembered Tony's words. You have a choice. You can do whatever makes you happy, even the smallest things. Inspired by this, Doc decided to visit Tony's home. Meanwhile, Tony was enjoying Christmas dinner with his family when there was a knock at the door. Opening it, he saw one of his friends stopping by. As he was about to close the door, he was shocked to see Doc standing outside. Tony's face lit up with joy, and he enthusiastically welcomed his friend inside. Tony introduced Doc to his family, and to his surprise, they greeted Doc warmly. Tony's family believed Doc must be a good man. After all, he had managed to change Tony's heart. The man who once harbored deep hatred for black people was now Doc's closest friend. Dolores, Tony's wife, embraced Doc and thanked him. "Thank you for helping Tony write those beautiful love letters to me," she said with a smile. In that moment, Doc's mission was fulfilled. He had succeeded in changing the hearts of at least one white family, showing them the value of kindness and equality. The film ends with a powerful message. No matter how small, every step toward understanding and change is a step worth taking. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this movie review. See you next time, and love you all.